we've asked Heather Gourley to speak to us today. I ask her every time we have a conference. In fact, when I announce we're having a conference, she always says, what am I doing this year? Or please don't ask me to do anything this year. Or, but she's always so willing. So today I asked her to do exactly the opposite that she wants to do. So I asked her to talk about functional listening evaluations, because everybody else likes to talk about functional listening evaluations over in that corner. But then I said, I don't want you to talk about a functional listening assessment. I want you to talk about when you walk into a classroom and look at a kid, what do you need to look for? That's a functional assessment of a student, right? And if you don't talk about that, it's totally okay. But that was what I was thinking in my head when I asked her to.
Okay, I'm gonna back this up a bit. Everything he said is totally true. First of all, I loved Sydney Dixon's presentation yesterday, and I too am an Adam fan. I think everybody in this room is an Adam fan, so we do whatever Adam asks us to do, right?
Thank you.
And so he did. I was coming and I was getting some information, some things to take down to St. George, and he's like, I don't have you presenting at Outreach Conference this year. We got a lot going and we're really busy. I'm like, that's okay with me. This is not my favorite thing. And literally I was in my office for like 10 minutes and he calls me. He's like, what are you doing? I said, nothing. Do you have a minute? Yes. Okay. So he comes over, sits down. He says, tell me what you know about functional listening assessment. Like, well, are you talking about functional listening evaluation? Or are you talking about functional listening assessment? And so we got into a conversation and I said, so this is me in functional listening assessment. I'm not going to go down that road too far yet because we're going to talk about that road. But so 10 minutes after he told me I wasn't doing anything, and of course we'd all seen the agenda and I wasn't on it, I was then on it again. So here I am.
So watch out. You never know. It might be you.
But this is one that I actually am excited about because I feel like this is the part of my job that, I mean, I like the diagnostic testing and things like that, but, and I like the therapy. I mean, yes, you're making a difference for kids and all of that, but I really like figuring out what is happening and what's, anyway, see, I'm going to start talking about too much and then this isn't going to be good. So hold on a second. Okay. We're going to go to Kahoot. I know we did this a couple years ago, but I just felt like, again, going back to Sydney Dixon's presentation, like we got to mix it up a little bit, right? So we're going to, go away. Okay, I'm going to go back to those. Sorry.
Is there a clicker up there?
There is a clicker. I don't know how to use the clicker, but there is a clicker. Okay, hold on. And we'll get your, there has to be an easier way to do this, but Vince didn't know and neither do I. So all the rest of you, this is what we're on. With the music. I think it's the one with the. I don't know where it is. Do you want me to make the QR code bigger? Yeah, right? Thanks, Emily. You probably have a professional version. We weren't going to do this because we needed the professional version, but.
Everybody scan it.
Everybody in there? Nope. Like 4, 5, 6, 7. I mean, not everybody needs to play. If you want to be able to play. QR code again. That music is really annoying. Okay. Are we good? Everybody in who wants to be in? Nope. Okay. Kahoot.it.
Kahoot.it?
Yes, right here. Join at Kahoot.it.
I'm just gonna put it.
Enter the game pin.
I'm not supposed to do that.
Okay, anybody else still trying to get in? Oh, okay. All right, let's start. It's a really stressful quiz here, you guys. Who's hottie patootie?
That's probably her.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, this is where we are. 3, 2, 1. I think it's like 20 seconds. These are really tough questions. A functional listening or hearing assessment is a valuable use of my limited time. True or false? I'm already
Not of mine.
losing your mind to the correct answer.
Yeah.
I wanted to do a poll.
Are you mine or are we mine? We're talking about my time or your time?
You, I want to know what you think.
Oh,
Okay, so we have 15 liars in here. A functional listening assessment takes a lot of time to gather relevant information.
I'm sorry, what was it?
A functional listening assessment takes a lot of time to gather relevant information.
Is that an option?
Yes, no, or maybe.
Oh, it is.
Maybe should.
Well, some of them say it depends.
Better not be a maybe.
I say maybe is the correct answer,
I said-
but you know.
I should have gone with what Heather would pick. Sorry.
Think like,
She is a.
no,
maybe.
by the end of this 45 minutes, hopefully you'll think like me. I'm just kidding. But, okay, a functional hearing assessment tells me everything I need to know about the student's auditory skills.
I'm gonna get already.
True, false, or maybe?
Come on, every answer's gonna be maybe.
See? 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 I should have gone maybe.
Okay, will you, okay, some of these, will you, just make a note if you're like, what? I don't know. Because I don't want to talk about it now, but I do want to address some of these things as we go through. True or false? A functional listening assessment can always be done in 30 minutes or less. I will also guide you to test taking strategies. I want you to see always or never, things like twice.
Never say all the word always.
No, absolutely get you in trouble.
There are actually, okay, in my class that I teach, I do put some questions in there that are an absolute, just because I'm like, just because I told you that does not mean it does not apply sometimes. It does. Okay, a functional hearing assessment requires me to prep specific settings and materials in advance.
I don't wanna.
It's the reggae one, because I'm like going on vacation soon. I don't know.
It's gonna break.
Okay,
Where are you going on vacation?
South Carolina, if there's anything left after.
After today?
And then up to Virginia to see my daughter, in Washington, DC. Okay, a functional listening assessment can be an excellent way to determine modifications and accommodations a student needs. True or false?
Why does it say I'm a pure genius every time?
Are you gonna put false?
It really doesn't. It has a question.
Because you think like I do.
Spend enough time with somebody you love.
Well, that's why I said maybe not you.
Okay, I don't know who me is. Usually that's me.
It's me.
It's
Come on. There's two B's on there. So which me is it?
A functional listening assessment does not give me practical information about a student's needs.
It's gonna be expensive. Whenever she puts the yellow on there. I don't agree with it. I don't know. Answering how Heather would answer that.
The chime disappearing with me.
Okay, I think we only have one more question.
See?
No, we have 2 more questions. Okay, a functional listening assessment equals a functional listening evaluation. We've already both told you the answer to this.
I didn't hear the answer.
She wasn't listening, no.
Just say true, true, true.
False.
False is the answer.
No, false is the answer.
Yes.
False. Beats bears.
Okay, last question.
False.
A functional listening assessment is best
That's
completed
during class.
using a recording method such as a rating scale or a design form.
I gave me over here. This makes me feel stupid.
This is not, this is, like I said, it was supposed to be a poll, but that costs $36. And I'm married to a financial advisor, and in case you don't know, like, markets are kind of in the toilet right now. So that was not where my discretionary income for the year was going, was this one.
At least I answered it right.
Okay. All right, let's get out of here.
There was something shady.
Oh. Sorry.
It was me.
Well, you should know it tells you
It
your
was
place.
me, yeah.
I mean, it tells you.
Podium. Hello, who's hello?
Oh, that was me.
Nice.
Hey.
So you get points for speed in Kahoot too.
That's
Number one is
I'm like-
me.
Yeah, you have to be fast. If you're distracted by the comment next to you.
Yeah.
All right, well done. Okay, hold on just a second because I got to the wrong, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying to share with people. And
Yeah, I thought I saw two. There were two. Yeah, there were two. I'm not the only one.
Okay, so this is the premise for this presentation now that we're 22 minutes in. Adam put out this questions for the presenters thing he shared with all of us yesterday that he just was talking about. And this was what was under this particular topic. What things outreach teachers do or look for when observing a student in class? Please don't have them just refer us to the checklists in the Big Building Success for Students in the Fast-Paced Classrooms binder. I'm looking for real world stuff. So I don't know who asked that question or has this interest, but that's the premise for what we're talking about. Hopefully what we're going to talk about today is real world. It's not just our forms. And you have the form. In fact, I'm going to just start the forms going around in case you haven't seen the forms in a little bit, just to kind of see what's on them. And as you look at them, just glance at them. There's just two. Here, I'll start one here and I'll start one on the other side. Just get an idea of like what information is actually on the form. What do you think about the rating scale? You've probably, well, let's ask that. How many of you have used one of these forms? These are both actually Karen Anderson forms. How many of you have used like a structured type of observation form for some sort of, okay, everybody? So a few years back, Adam, when we were talking about this, said, can you develop like an observation form or whatever? And I'm like, yeah, I can come up with something. I have like 6 versions on my computer that I've started. The problem is it's so personal in how you take that information down and what it means to you when you're then going back and assessing and reporting and all of that. So I'm probably getting way ahead of myself, but let's start here. So who should we assess? I put everyone. I didn't mean to put everyone. I meant to put anyone. Like we can do this with anyone. Okay, I might change that word. I don't know. But anyone that we see on our caseloads could benefit from a functional hearing assessment. We will talk about what that is and what it looks like in just a second. What are we looking for? Everything. Okay, it's it can be overwhelming if you are really trying to get a good picture. Where are we observing? Everywhere. Like legitimately, we want a lot of information. That doesn't mean a lot of time. Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit too. When are we taking data? All the time. Okay. And what I mean by that is not necessarily hitting record and having it on your iPad, which works. I've done distance observations before, functional listening assessments, particularly over COVID. There was a time I was quarantined because my husband had COVID, and I was supposed to be serving a student in the outreach that had just gone to the outreach. And it was a very complicated condition. And we needed to do a really good job with what we were proposing for this student. And I did it over an iPad. I was able to get all of the information I needed. So that is possible to do that. Why is this important? Okay, that's kind of like my way of saying duh. Like, we should know why this is important. Okay, we should know why having all of this information helps us in our jobs. Most importantly, helps our students, but we'll talk about it. I don't mean that as like, oh, if you don't know why this is important, then you're not thinking clearly about what you do. That's not what I mean. I just mean, this is like what's driving it, right? Your why is what's driving everything else you're doing when you do this assessment. And then how does this impact direct intervention? So we are in the business of seeing kids and supporting them in the classroom based on what they need to access their education. How is what we do with this functional listening assessment actually going to help us with that? You probably all have thoughts on that. I want more your thoughts than my thoughts. There's a PowerPoint, we'll use it, but we want to talk about it a little bit more. Okay, so this is just kind of out of my head, just things I was just thinking about what a functional listening assessment is and what it is not. First of all, I did not put this anywhere, and I was really liking capital letters, whatever reason when I was doing this, but that's why I asked my question in the APD conversation, is I think that we get confused with functional listening and evaluation, which we got training on last year, and that I've been told many of us are using. Is that correct? Kind of? That has a place, right? But it is a different place than what this is. This, you'll see, I smiled when they talked about reports. I have sample reports at the end of this presentation that I've done. There are different fonts, there are different layouts, there's different information in it, everything is different about every report, just based on where I was at USDB when I was doing it, how I felt that day, which font I liked, whatever. But the point is they are functional hearing assessments, they are functional skills, functional listening skills, observations, they are observation of functional hearing, whatever it is, it all relates to the same thing, which basically means this is not a formal test. This is not a capital F, capital L, capital A, or whatever those would be. FLA, yes. That's not what this is. Lowercase. Okay, so if you can kind of internalize that lowercase version, doesn't matter what you call it, it's what are you getting out of it. So when you talk to somebody about a functional listening assessment and somebody says they need a functional listening assessment, well, do you mean they need a functional listening evaluation? Because that's a specific little prescribed form that you want me to fill out and do with that student. That really is testing auditory skills in a naturally contrived listening environment that we are expecting them to do in the classroom, right? But what this is doing is saying, I'm not even necessarily talking to that kid that day. I am just sitting there, I am watching what they are doing, and I'm taking that information and I'm gonna go back and say, these are areas that I saw that they were proficient in, and these are areas where it looks like they could use some support, or they really relied on visual cues or whatever in these circumstances. That might help clarify for you when you're trying to determine what someone is asking for. For me, you will notice even in this presentation, I didn't go back and change it because I thought this makes it natural for me. Whether I called it functional hearing assessment, functional listening assessment, skills assessment, whatever, it's all the same thing. We're observing a variety of conditions to get as much information as we can about that. You've all been able to kind of look at this. Any questions about some of that?
Is it something that we need to get like permission to test on?
No. It's not a formal test. If you're already serving that student, you can go observe them in any condition you want. Yeah.
Those of us who aren't serving, you have to get parent permission to do observations.
Yes, but you're not seeing any students that you're not serving,
Yeah.
right? So before you see anyone, you have a referral. Once you get that referral, you're free to go with this, okay? It can be qualitative and quantitative. And if there's questions on that as we go through this, ask me, because you can do pluses and minuses. You can do these rating forms, these rating scales. But you also can write essays. I should show you some of my, we'll get to that. Anything else? I don't think so. Okay, but it does need to be done by somebody who knows what hearing loss is. what you're looking for, right? If you don't know what you're looking for, it's going to be hard to describe what you see. Okay, these are the forms I have going around. I didn't link these as resources at the end of the presentation, but they do have these are like the real forms. So they have where they came from, and you can just click on the form and get that information. I'm passing them around, again, just as an example. Okay, I look at these questions and I think it goes back to it depends. Like, what level of signal to noise ratio was there? What was the context that this activity was in? Something like ability to attend to class activities. Are they distractible, fidgety, typical level of attention? I love assessing a child based on their typically functioning peers all around them. There was one time I had a little guy and they're like, oh, he does not pay attention. He doesn't understand what's being said. He's not doing anything. I went in and observed him. In 5 minutes, he was like the only one raising his hand. He was the only one that was visually attentive to the teacher. And I'm looking at all these other kids around him and I'm like, okay, he might have some issues, but developmentally, these other kids all have issues too then. So we need to like take it in a grain of salt and document what we see. And then we do it again the next year and see if anything's changed. Because maybe in that particular context, I'm jumping ahead of myself, but this is what we're doing. We're just talking. I did a little evaluation the other day for a little girl in the blind school. I don't serve her, but they wanted a functional listening assessment. And the consensus was at the end of that time was in this particular setting with this number of kids in her class, this particular teacher and this particular aide, she has access. She's doing well. And next year, when the teacher changes, or there's 3 more kids in the class, or whatever, she might need some additional supports. But right now, based on where she is, she's doing well. So a functional listening assessment, I don't think is anywhere in here, is not a one and done, right? It's like something that, I know I've talked in the past about how I really love my consult time kind of being front loaded. At the beginning of the school year, because that gives you this time to go in and do these things, to go in and say, you know what, if I'm going to write my kid up for 120 minutes annually, you break that out over 9 months, that's, how many minutes is that? Somebody do the math. I don't know, 20 minutes a month, something like that. So your kids that you have on monthly service time, it's hard to go in 20 minutes, get everything you need to do a functional listening assessment. But if you do that at the beginning of the school year and you really figure out what the needs of that child are, and you do that pretty in depth, and you do like for 3 weeks, I'm just going to do my functional listening assessments on the kids who might need it this year, you've got good data and good information to drive what you support that classroom and that teacher with. That's me. Okay, so we're going to be getting to the next thing after this. Okay, what do you think of when you think of functional?
What's working?
Okay, what's working? Give me some words.
Practical.
Practical.
Advocacy.
Advocacy.
Benefiting the child.
Okay, benefiting the child. You think of functional listening assessment. Those are all good things. Anything else come to mind?
Applicable.
Applicable.
Real world.
Real world, like that, Lynn.
Measurable.
Measurable.
Abilities.
Okay. All right. So I started with like 4 little things. I looked in the dictionary and I don't really like the words that they use to describe functional in the dictionary. I think that it goes along with what we're talking about. It needs to be practical and applicable, right? In order to be a good one. So these are some of the things that have come to mind or that I've found kind of synonymous with the word functional, or that other people have said to me when I've talked to them about what do you think of when you think of a functional hearing assessment. Authentic, genuine, useful, effective, typical, practical, working, applied, natural, adequate.
I find like if I see the word adequate though, I think back to that term that we use or we have in the law that says like de minimis, like you're getting adequate, you're getting just enough so that we're legal.
The problem is that's the law.
Right.
And so this is a different topic. I was actually looking at taking the LSAT the other night. Might go back to that. The problem is we have to function under the law, right? So I've told this story before. My son's IQ differences between nonverbal and verbal was 50. But he was within average with verbal. You tell me that 7-year-old kid in second grade was not frustrated beyond whatever when he has a 50-point difference in his IQ scores between verbal and nonverbal. But it was adequate. He was within average with verbal. So it's what we have to work with. It stinks. It's the law. I have some kids down in St. George that see a private SLP, and I've been having these conversations with the parents and the SLP saying, I know this is what you're focusing on in therapy, but I can't legally write a goal for that. That is, they're not far enough behind. This is something that could still be typically developing for a child of their age. I realize that we would like to see it. I realize we hope it's coming. I do support it still in therapy, but I cannot put that on an IEP. So, you know, when you get an IEP that comes to you, SLP in the private world, you know, it may look different, but this is why, because we're operating under adequate. I agree, Terry, it stinks.
And when you're paying $75 an hour, you can function under optimal,
Yes,
you know?
and when you're paying $75 an hour, I will do whatever you want me to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so Adam was
Any
trying
takers?
to, Adam in that little 3-minute conversation we had in my office was trying to come up with what he was gonna call this. And he came up with the top 10, okay? So I'm like, top 10 works, that'll keep me focused. Okay, it turned out this was like the worst thing for me because I'm like, what 10 do I pick? You know, what is that? But this is kind of where I narrowed it down. There's so much more to discuss and we can talk about those things at different times. But these are some of the areas that we'll get into. Okay, so this is where I was going with how I do things. I would say the first thing you need to do going into a functional listening assessment is being prepared. And being prepared does not mean have all your materials together. Your materials can be a notebook and a pencil and your eyeballs, okay, and your ears, I guess. But know yourself. If you like the form, take the dang form. Whoever wrote this question doesn't want the form, right? So if you know how to fill out that form and you know what that form means to you, and it helps drive your decisions for intervention and support in that child's classroom, then use the form. But for me, it doesn't do that. For me, I need all of my data. I need to write down everything that I have seen, the context, everything. And then I can maybe take that information and put it on my form. But I still have those specific instances of what I've seen. Part of it is old brain. I forget, like if someone was to ask me, you know, well, what was the context that I was in? I'm like, I don't know, but they could do it. So there you go. So I write a lot just because I don't remember a lot. Communication with your teachers in advance. Okay, we talked about this a little bit again yesterday with Sydney Dixon's presentation. You show up in their classroom and you're sitting there watching and they're so used to being evaluated, right? We're used to being evaluated. They think you're evaluating them. When you can go in and explain to them what you're really there for, and maybe you do show them that life form and have them fill it out because that's their way of being able to give some input, or do an interview with them in advance, see what questions or concerns they have about that student's functioning. It gets you a lot more of that trust, where then you can go back after you find things that will support the teacher, that will support the student, and make that a more successful listening environment for that child. Review their history. That might be hard, it might take some time, calling the parents and checking in, but that can be so critical. Right? I don't want to get too far into that, but if there are questions on that.
If I've already done it and there's a psych report in there, I'd look at the psych report. It'll all be there for you already.
Well, and I was going to say in my reports too, and you'll notice if you actually look at them, you don't need to look at them. But if you look at my reports, some of them are more in depth than others. It depends on my mood that day. I tend to really like to be very in depth and very comprehensive because I feel like somebody has to do it, right? We get enough things that are superficial and not very complete. I know if Heather's seen that kid or looked at their file, there's going to be a full report in there. I hope if I've seen a kid somewhere, there's a full report in there that describes their history. It may just be in a different assessment. But being able to include that really gives context and understanding for other things that might be impacting this child's performance in that setting. Know their audiogram before you go in there. What do you expect to see based on their audiogram? Based on how much you know they wear their devices, based on when their age of identification was and any past intervention they've had. And then the parent interview. Again, doesn't need to be in depth. Do I do all of these things every single time I go and do this? No, I don't. But if it's a kid that I don't know, then I'm gonna get that information. If it's a student that I know pretty well and I just wanna kind of be tracking what they're doing, then I don't do all of that. I know I've done it at some point. Any questions on being prepared? The most important thing I feel like is knowing yourself.
Your reports are amazing.
Oh,
We
thanks.
got your report on one of our kids that transferred, and the speech pathologist's eyes were like, this is the best report I've ever
Oh,
seen.
I'm glad it
I know.
made it to you. That makes me happy to know. I'm like, nobody reads those things. Heather and I joke about that all the time. Nobody reads these reports.
That's what I
But
joke
we know they're there. So, know your purpose is really important too, I felt like. So these are just some cans that I kind of cut and pasted off some different resources that I just liked, you know, a statement or two that maybe they said. But it can provide information about how the child is currently using their hearing in a variety of settings. It can guide the IEP team in developing instructional strategies, can serve as a guide for determining what accommodations are needed in the classroom, can be used as a support for formal testing. Okay, let's talk about that. What do you think about that? Can be used as support for formal testing. Anyone?
So do you want me to bring up the elephant in the room that we're dealing with in our district?
You can bring up any elephants you would like
So we
in 17 minutes or less.
Okay, we have a situation where there's kids that spoken has become their dominant first language, but the kid has some sign and parents are wanting an interpreter because they've been told by specific people that they need an interpreter. But all of their audiological testing is showing otherwise. And so we have these that we're using for testing for specific families, just to provide additional information from the teacher, from the previous year's teacher of what they saw, and then the new teacher, just to see how well they're performing in the classroom compared to their typical peers.
Right.
Just because a formal assessment is showing them within typical range, but that's not showing them functioning in the classroom. And so that's how we're using it. That's
Absolutely.
your question, right?
That's great.
Absolutely, yes. So your formal language assessment may show a child completely within average range on their testing. But you go into that classroom and you see concerns. They're watching other kids. They're needing to be told things 4 times. They're requiring, you know, direct prompts, whatever. But you know what you're looking for those things. But that can be, so it can support or it can refute, right? I feel like, I know in the outreach, we don't do a full battery of formal assessments. I don't know in the districts if you are the team that does the full battery of assessments, and I know the assessments in the districts aren't done as often as we do them here. We do a full battery annually, and that extra functional listening assessment, when it's needed, can be really helpful to give us more information. Again, if you want to talk further on that, we can do that, but we'll just keep rolling just to get through it all.
It's sometimes
Keep
surprising on a single-sided loss.
Yes,
How different you're gonna show scores on a regular assessment in a quiet room compared to a functional assessment. I think that's always shocking to see kids. Because parents are like, no, they do fine, and we're like, can we please put an earpiece in their good ear, because they're not fine.
absolutely. And I have done so much research on unilateral hearing loss over the last 6 months. That's kind of been another place that I've been really focusing a lot of time. And one of my reports that I've linked at the back is on a child with unilateral hearing loss. I don't even remember the circumstance. Like I said, I forget everything. So it's in there specifically to document the things that, first of all, we need to know, we're not talking about, we need to know what that looks like, right? We need to know what unilateral hearing loss might manifest as. And there are some opinions going around, and there's some poor research, or not poor research, poor conclusions. How about that?
Insufficient research.
Poor conclusions with insufficient research. We have to be careful in looking at our research. Wow, I'm digressing. Okay, let's go move on. Okay, It can also provide useful information for audiologists, right? Those of you who are in contact with your audiologists all the time, a functional hearing assessment could be really helpful in them understanding how well they're utilizing their devices in the education. They're not educational audiologists necessarily. We have Janelle, so I can go to Janelle and just say, here, this is what I see, and do your magic. But the clinical audiologists also can benefit from that information. Okay, so these are our numbers 3 through 10. We've gotten through 2. Recording everything. I just don't want to miss something. Like, I feel like my time is valuable enough that if I'm there, I'm going to document everything so that if somebody asks me, well, what about this type of setting? I've got that recorded if I saw them in that type of setting or I didn't. And I have something to back that up. So I'm really intentional with my observation and what I'm watching, and then the documentation of what I see. The pluses and minuses in the forms that go around don't work for me, but they might work for you. Why? So we're complete with the analysis of what it all means and how we then apply it. Okay, their behaviors. These are not comprehensive lists. I wrote down what came to mind and then I moved on. So there might be other things that you can think of that go on this list. Are there things that are not here that you would be watching for as far as their behaviors, their listening behaviors in the classroom, or just regular behaviors in the classroom that might impact what you see?
Oh, and I have on-off task.
Yeah, I would like to also point out that a lot of times we get so caught up in assessment that we're like, oh, this kid's off task, when everybody in the class is off task. They're teenagers too, or they're little children. My 8-year-old hears fine and is as smart as a whip, but if she gets talking, she misses everything the teacher says. And we have to remember that kids are also kids. So we don't want to have this, there's never going to be this perfect world like, oh, they were so good, they just paid all this attention. If they're like that, they're an alien, okay? If they're not like that, they're just a human kid. So that's another thing that we're trying to tease out here is this a hearing loss thing, or is this them just being a teenager or
Can you do
a
an
young
in-service
kid?
for parents so that they can understand that? A lot of them come with these arguments, they won't even listen to the reg ed teacher that's a 30-year veteran, because they're like, oh, yeah, I hear you, but no, my kid's different. And it's like, no, they're first grader, they're all tired because they've all gone from a half day to a full day, or they're,
And that's where I feel
so-
like we have the opportunity. Sorry, Heather, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, that's why I have on-off task behavior observation forms where you can observe and do them and against
And what the
the
peers are
whole
doing,
time.
yeah.
And then that usually will convince a teacher that's like, oh, yeah, okay.
But, so this is an example. If you're sitting in a classroom and it's just quiet and the teacher's talking to them about the day and whatever, can you observe in that setting whether or not a child is on task or off task? I mean, like you can, right? And how they are with their peers. If there's 4 other kids in there that are kind of distracted, or the kid next to them is playing with them, is that wrong for a 6-year-old to be doing, or a 9-year-old? I mean, so we do need to have an understanding of child development, right? But we have that. But if we don't have an understanding of child development, at least be able to describe what the peers are doing too. Like, at least be able to say, you know what? He was talking out and he was turning around talking to his friend and he wasn't raising his hand, but so were, 5 other kids in the classroom that were his models that were around him. So I'm not going to assign that to an issue with his listening behaviors. I'm going to assign that, we'll look at it again next year or something like that. That's the comprehensive part of your report, is really your interpretation of what some of those behaviors indicate. Just listing the behavior, just saying he was off task doesn't tell the story, because like Heather's saying, off task compared to what? Like Adam's saying, okay, so do I expect okay, I'll give you an example. When they make the kids sit crisscross in circle time, I about die. Because if I sit crisscross, I can last for about 2 minutes and then I need to move. So granted, they're more flexible and young and whatever, but I'm just saying, like, could you imagine if that was something that was uncomfortable for you and you were having to sit there crisscross for 20 minutes? I would be moving too. Somebody would have to tell me 15 times to sit correctly. So those are the things to kind of think through a little bit. and really apply as you're looking at these kids and how they're doing in their classrooms.
Okay,
Can I just,
Yes.
one of the things that I have found that is helpful to me is that when I talk to the teacher before I do the observation, I try to find a time or work with the teacher on doing a couple different activities, or finding a time when they're going to be doing, and especially when they're doing group work.
Mhm.
Because one of the things that I found with a lot of my DHH kids is that they may respond when the teacher asks them directly, but they're not participating when they do group work.
Right.
They sit there silently with their peers. And so I like to get an observation of that.
Setting. And the next one, exactly what you're saying. We need a variety of things. Does this mean you have to follow that kid around all day at school?
No,
No.
but like, I just observed a kid 4 different times, but I went with the teacher and went on the calendar and we went through, this is math, this is phonics, this is specialty, this is when we're doing small groups, and that way I could see also centers. And yeah, it's a pain for me to go out there and see that many times, but it gives you a more accurate portrayal of the child at different times, beginning of the day, end of the day.
You have way more accurate, complete information when you start your school year or whatever, and that may prevent you from having to go out there every month for the next 3 months, because that student doesn't need you on all of those other settings. Or it prevents you from missing a setting where he does need you, right? So if you've only seen them in their classroom at opening circle time, and they followed directions to go and get their pencil and their notebooks and whatever, and they sat down. Well, how routine was that? Is that what they do every day? So with this, one of the examples of the reports that I gave in there, I think even 2 of them, they were like 30 minutes of total observation time. But in that 30 minutes, I saw them come in from recess where it was crazy and chaotic noise, and I was able to watch, like, did he respond when the bell rang or when they were called to come in, or was he still playing and waiting until he saw everybody else? He came in, the teacher called him from across the room with a bunch of kids, doing what the kids do when they come in after recess. They transitioned to an activity. It was a quiet activity, then moved to group work. I saw a lot in that 30 minutes. Now, am I going to say this is everything? This is a full picture of this child? No, but for this child, he was one with the unilateral hearing loss, where we're looking at, can they localize? What's their hearing and noise? Those types of settings. He did phenomenally well. He did not show any problems. I don't need to follow him all day long to necessarily make sure if that's happening all over the place. The teacher needs to understand, and whoever gets that report needs to understand, that these are the conditions that I saw him in. If you see something different, let me know. That's another thing I usually like to do with the teachers when I'm done, is I usually like to say, did the student behave today how you would say they typically do? And were the conditions of the class today consistent with what you would typically see in the classroom? Or was this a particularly quiet day or a particularly chaotic day or whatever? Because again, if you're driving your recommendations based off of that, you're making a recommendation that may not apply tomorrow, right? So in the report, I would state, these observations only consumed 30 minutes of the educational day. However, a variety of context, settings, and listening environments were able to be seen during that time period. And were consistent with what the teacher sees, behaviors were consistent. So if there's any concerns or there's a specific type of setting that they would like to be observed, please let me know. I'll come back and I'll do that.
Can I ask a question? Hi, it's Belen. I'm just curious, when you guys, I would love to go observe all my kiddos in all these settings, and that would be so helpful. But I feel this stress of, okay, how do I do that plus get my lessons done every week with them? Like, how do you work doing that plus getting the goals finished that you put in there? Or do you just maybe not work with them one-on-one and do lessons like that, like grammar or whatever? Or is your time spent all observing and
Here a little bit. I'm not good at that yet, but I've decided, I think that Heather referred to it already, that setting aside the couple weeks in August and the first couple weeks of September and time then to do those FLEs, observations, language samples, reading samples, all those kinds of things really serves me well. And then it ends up being a short quarter for sure, but I don't start teaching lessons that support their IEPs until the middle of September for basically my whole caseload.
Thank you, Lori.
Can you finish all of your goals if you do that? Like, if you have, they're going to do this X number of times, are you able to do all that?
I do, because in the third and fourth quarter, and it depends on when their IEP is, of course, during the year, but because I know that I'm not including those weeks in the weeks that I'm trying to accomplish IEP goals and data, like you said, I make up for it in the other weeks.
And I think too, sorry, Adam, did you want to say something?
Go ahead.
I think, again, this goes back to Sydney Dixon's presentation yesterday about we are so focused on we need the goals done, and which clearly the goals are written to benefit the student, right? That's how we're documenting what the progress is, and ideally that is what the student needs in order to access that education. So I don't want to downplay the goals, but if you don't have a full picture of that student, do you know what that student needs? You might be writing goals that student really functionally does not need to access their education, and there might be things that are more appropriate you can be focusing on.
One of the things that our district has done that's kind of interesting, but they've run it through all the way up the flagpole to the state level, is that we've rewritten all of our goals and our service times to accommodate a 3-on, 1-off weekly
Where's my
thing.
my
So we
team
do 3 weeks direct service, 1 week
Indirect.
testing, observation, meeting, paperwork. I mean, not that we don't do meetings all the rest of the time too, but
It
yeah.
sounds like that's pretty standard. Is that?
We tried that at USDB. You might remember.
tried, I
the
remember.
Presentation. Okay, anyway, yes, that's a good way to do it. We have about 2.5 minutes. So we're on number 5 and we haven't gotten to the videos for practice, but let's just kind of cruise through this. Variety of instruction is important too, not just the variety of the setting, right? We really need to understand, they're showing videos. Is there closed captioning? Because that kid may do great the whole day and then they put the video on and nobody's taking notes for them. There's no closed captioning. The kid's on a 504. They're just kind of, they're happy and they're doing their thing. Don't think they have any issues until that video starts, right? So that's maybe one of those things that we don't always think about especially with the younger students, right? Because we don't really think about that lecture type of environment. Any questions on any of this? I know we could go so in depth, but if you have a specific question about the observation and like what it might look like, let me know. The complexity of the listening environment is also another huge thing that we want to consider. What are the distractions? I have downloaded a decibel meter on my phone and I've used it. The other day I was in the lunchroom over here and we were at 85. Nobody's hearing a dang thing in there unless you're 3 feet away from them. Anything there I really want to hit? Listening fatigue. I want to hit the listening fatigue. I have 3 kids with hearing loss and I forget about listening fatigue. I'm noticing it now that I'm getting old, that I have listening fatigue, right? I have thinking fatigue. If we're observing a child at 9 a.m., it's going to be different than observing that child at 3 p.m. So maybe take a peek at what their schedule is and see what types of programming they have in their classroom in that late afternoon. That doesn't mean that your child necessarily has listening fatigue, right? But it would be good to at least get an eye on it and see what the listening demands are for those kids during that time period. Following directions, we all know about this, but this is again something that I don't feel like we get on the forms. We don't get, was it a complex or a simple direction? Was it a routine direction or a novel direction? Was their response delayed or appropriate? Yes, that might be on the form, but that's an overall response, not just specifically to a following direction based on routine, complex, whatever. Okay, I always like to also make note of the teacher strategies, because if we're trying, particularly if we're on a 504 or a consult, we're supporting that teacher, not as much the student, right? We're supporting the student's access through working with the staff. So if they are doing great modeling, or you see that their directions are written on the board, or they have rephrased something and that student is responding to that, I want to give that teacher that feedback. Say, you know, you are doing great things. The student really responded when you rephrased that. He didn't get it the first time, but he got it the second time. This might go into my evaluation report again, saying, right now he doesn't need any supports. His teacher has the skills to be able to accommodate what he needs. She's rephrasing, she's modeling, she's whatever. But we might need to reevaluate that when we get new staff working with the student.
Can I just say that's a great collaboration tool with teachers too,
Right.
because if you're complimenting them on some things they're doing, they're so much more willing to do other things
Right.
that you might suggest for them.
I love that, yeah.
Amen.
Okay, this is where my brain started going.
Voice.
Delayed versus timely responses, we know what that looks like. Again, I just can't say this enough. The complexity, the context is so important. And then any compensatory strategies that you see the child using, note that also. If you go in there and you're writing down everything you see and you're considering all of these things or the things that are on the forms and you're just taking notes, that's how I do it. That's how I get the most complete picture. You're not going to miss these things. You're going to see what that student did to fix the problem when he didn't hear. Did he look to the other kids? Did he ask the teacher for clarification? What did he do? Okay, finally, what does it all mean? So after you get all that stuff together, you really do want to document it in some way, even if it's just for yourself. These often go nowhere other than for me to just know that I've done it and I have a good picture of what that child's doing. You can read those, but the other areas that they may need some auditory training or some areas that you see them maybe being a little bit, I just realized I can look at my computer and actually read it instead of like going like this. Just say what they can do. Let them know what they can do. That's important. That does describe their success with their listening, with their amplification. They may appear to be a kid that needs support for listening behaviors, but when you really go down the list, their listening behaviors are pretty darn good. What they're missing are some other issues that may not be associated to their hearing loss. And when you can document that, it's really provides the team with a lot of good information. We don't have time for any ideas, questions, or examples.
But we'll take it. So we do have time.
Yeah.
We don't have lunch out yet. So.
Oh, then we'll just keep talking. Sorry. Am I?
One of your like write-ups that you did, if you want to like, you know, take out the kiddo's name or something like that, just so that we could see kind of what yours.
She has that at the end. Yep.
And like I said, they're all named something different because this doesn't have a name. Okay, it's what are you doing? That's really what it's all about. What are you doing and what's the purpose?
So we're just talking about, like, to me, this is more what my job is, right? And then I have to write these IEP goals, and I feel like IEP goals aren't really what I need to do with the kid or how I need to help them in the classroom, right? It's more like giving resources to teachers and helping the kids self-advocate. How would you say that translates to IEP goals for you?
Well, you're taking me down another path.
But we want to know this path. We want to hear this path.
Okay, personal opinion by Heather. I feel like we do a lot more direct service than is maybe necessary.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from whether it's administration or other professionals or just the way we've always done it, not valuing what we can bring to the table when we're doing things like this.
Right.
That really fall under a consult, accommodations, modifications, support realm. If we were able to do that and focus on what that child needs, what do they need to be successful in their environment? Do they need me pulling them out for 20 minutes a week to make sure they can answer this type of direction? Or do they need the teacher having more understanding about how to rephrase something because they might not understand that vocabulary, or how to pre-teach some information that yes, we can do. But so I think it's hard because you have to have an appreciation for the importance of the job that you're doing that doesn't look like just writing IEP goals and being a related server.
Well, and I think it also goes back to what's in your present levels, because our goals, our accommodations, any modifications, service minutes are all based on what does that student need. And if you're not seeing a need in the present levels, based on the testing that you're doing and the information that you're gathering, that's how I brought it up to families and parents and even other team members.
I think, and that's a conversation, if you are interested in any of this, like email me, call me, whatever, and let's have a lunch and I will come chat with you about it, because I really do feel like there are ways to very well defend that position, and very justifiably so, not to work yourself out of seeing a student, but to serve them more appropriately. And I think that we've kind of lost that, again, going back to Sydney Dixon's presentation, I think we've lost that, what do the kids need, and that personalized, differentiated instruction to succeed, as opposed to, well, why don't they have an IEP? They need to see you, they have a hearing loss. Well, okay, but that doesn't mean that that's what they need. Yeah. And then Allison, sorry, go ahead.
Jamie and I were just discussing, like, when do we get to do this? Because there's not time in the schedule to go in and do the observations through different times in the day. But I was lucky that I inherited a caseload where the teacher who was before me had not written a lot of IEP goals, in districts that are not asking me to write a lot of IEP goals. But I've really struggled with that, because I feel like I'm there as more of a support, and I can help with their other IEP goals, and I can pull the kid, and some kids it's very appropriate for me to be doing things like, they're going to struggle more with letter sound things that they need extra support of because of their hearing loss. And there are kids who, I have one right now, this year I'm working on, he's a senior. So, okay, how do you apply to a disability resource center? And I have to learn this myself because I've never done it before. And what does the ADA mean for me as a person with a hearing loss? And then before we've worked on, okay, this is your audiogram, what does this mean? What causes your hearing loss? Those kind of things, that's my role.
So,
but I feel like
that's not an IEP necessarily, right?
No.
That's like life skills that these students need to learn that are different.
Right, and so I feel like I don't always need to be writing IEP goals for kids, because I'm providing other kind of things that they need because of their deafness, but it's not what it's normally put down on an IEP.
So your first question was, where do you find the time? And I know that's what Dylan asked. So I just want to be clear that I know I said everyone, we do this on everyone. You don't need to do this on everyone. I would love it if it was like, I mean, my goal is like when we get a new student, or they have a 3-year eval coming up, or they've really made a lot of progress over the last year, and I don't feel like we need to continue being as intensive as we have been, or I need something to support or refute my formal testing. That's when I do this. As far as the time goes, first of all, this is IP support, because this is driving your, like if you have goals on a student, those are minutes. You are getting data. You walk away from that observation session of 2 hours and you've got data, hard data to drive your IEP, whether it's for IEP goals or it's not. So while you might not be targeting specific goals, you might be getting generalization data on, we've been working on following directions in therapy for 6 months. Can he do it in his classroom? And that's what you're specifically watching for. In the meantime, you're getting all of this other information while you go through there. Does it take some creative scheduling? Yes, the 3-1 schedule, or maybe on Mondays, you've decided that, for this 2 hours, I'm not gonna see this student this Monday. I'm gonna make them up at another time or whatever. I mean, it does. And I can help with that too if you want. I get really logistically.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
No, please.
I'm not a teacher of the deaf, I know that.
Neither am I.
When my teachers of the deaf, or I felt like I haven't had time to do that, I will send classroom teachers questionnaires. And that's an observation form, and I will send you the questionnaires that I use.
Please, we can add that to the file. Go
Our
ahead.
district is changing too a lot with a lot of our single-sided CI students, because the problem is I could go, and luckily my boss and our 504 coordinator director are totally on board. They're like, that's an access issue with the new implant student. So that's not an IEP, that's a 504. And so I don't even write IEP goals for that student off of the RL rehab. We write in it RL rehab as needed in their 504. And that allows me to change my goals weekly if I need to. And I don't have to do an addendum. I don't have to do any of that stuff. So I think that we can work smarter and not harder. And I think it's really important for us to get away from, because when I first came in, I'm like, oh, child find, I have to have every kid on an IEP. I have to show up for these families. I have to, you know, and it ended up cutting my time with the kids that really needed me. And so that allows me to serve my kids 2 hours a week with brand new implants versus a child that I just need to be really assertive with the teacher and making sure that she's understanding what she's getting.
Right.
And with the closed captioning and stuff like that, it's not always accessible. So I always teach my teachers how to use a splitter, and they split off one to the classroom mic and the other to my student's mic. And so that student is getting the direct input from the videos as well, which a lot of them don't need the closed captioning if they have that. So that helps kind of catch those kids as well.
I think too, some of the kids you might feel like need direct service, but maybe they don't need direct service every month. Like maybe, you know, this goes into, I know we've talked about this in the past too, how we're writing our services for some of those kids. Are we putting ourselves in a position where we are needing to be in every school, you know, twice a month or whatever to see these kids? Or do we have a month where this child doesn't need me this month? I was intensive with them last month. So this month I can spend that time being intensive with this other student and get them up to speed and see what they need and change that focus as you move through the year a little bit. So, okay, this is everything we do is to help them to succeed, right? With optimal access. Optimal, I put optimal, the law says adequate, okay? So we're aiming for optimal. If a functional listening assessment shows that they are indeed achieving this with present skills and or supports in place, we should celebrate. I feel like too often we feel like we need to find the need. We need to find where we're going to be useful and helpful and beneficial to that family and to that school. And so we come up with IEP goals, just in on that discussion, that maybe aren't the most effective thing for that child to be successful. And then always continue to monitor for any change in setting, any change in teachers, any change that might affect that. My reports are at the end, and then this is I think there are some links here to just some video clips of one class that I see a bunch of the kids in. We're going to go through and just, there's not anything phenomenal necessarily in these. I just took a few different settings. Heather took one for me.
I was gonna say, you heard me laughing on one of those?
PE, centers, breakfast, music time, just to go through and see what you see. What would you write down that you observed during that time period? We are going to unlink these. They all have media release forms, but since we're sharing this with like whoever has the link to Outreach Conference, we're going to unlink these, I don't know, in a day or two?
Yeah, next,
like that.
we won't go public with our links until next week. So
Okay.
it's safe for you to look at these over the weekend, but we will be taking these off once it goes live on the YouTube. So.
Okay, that's all. See, we took the 10-minute break and now we did an hour.
Yeah. Thank you.